Hi, this is Rick Frederick reporting on Lepore and Sesco 1994, distorting children's reports and interpretations of events through suggestions or suggestion. A very nice study here, important study on what happens when you question children in certain ways. So these were youngsters, preschoolers, 4 to 6 years old, who had interactions with a teaching assistant. They were either familiar with this teaching assistant who had been in their class for several weeks doing certain events, or they had never seen this teaching assistant. And the assistant then came in an interview and did some things that none of which were inappropriate, but could be construed inappropriately with just a little prompting. And so the children who had these interactions were later interviewed in various ways to see if their recall of what happened was distorted, or whether they could be prompted to say incriminating things. So there's a long list of takeaways from this study. So number one, 4 to 6 year olds will produce misleading reports about their interactions when they are prompted to do so by an opinionated interviewer. So bias is a real problem in interviewing children. People who do forensic interviewing should not be biased, and they should have a neutral demeanor. Suggestive questions distorted cued recalls, but not free recalls. So the children were always fairly good at telling stories about what happened, even after having been given suggestive questions. Children in the incriminating interview, where the interviewer took an incriminating tone, were more likely than other children to make errors on cued recall items. Children who were led to believe by a form of questioning by a biased interviewer later affirmed that the TA had engaged in questionable behaviors which they had not done, and that children then embellished their responses and added further incriminating details. The distorting effect of the incriminating questioning style persisted without additional reinforcement. The effects of suggestive questioning on children's interpretations were quite strong. There is great danger in evoking false information, misleading reports from young children when they are engaged in negatively charged incriminating interviews. Additionally, young children are prone to pick up misinformation and misinterpretation when they are led to do so by an adult interviewer. Again, the takeaways from this study: the danger of false reports appear to be particularly high in young children who have had only a brief encounter and no previous contact with the suspect. So to set up their study, they cited these principles. Children often look to adults to how to interpret what's happened. When young children report about something they've seen, they tend to provide only brief and vague details in a free recall. And so interviewers must often press for more information and lead children towards providing information that is relevant to the investigation. Of course, the whole point of this study is what are the vulnerabilities to the children's memories based on the sort of style that you use. Leading questions potentially contain misinformation that children readily incorporate into their memories. Memory is constructive. This questioning style changes the memory. And finally, I think here, despite explicit instructions not to use leading questions, nearly 1/3 of all questions asked by interviewers are leading. So what did they do? They had a design here where they used 2 different interviewing styles and 2 different relationships to the suspect, a 2x2. And so here's what happened. Experimenter began interaction, and then a male confederate interrupted, remained, experimenter left. And then this confederate did all sorts of staged behaviors, playing with child, took child's hand and touched a Simon game, asked for some help in taking off their sweater. All of this for very innocent behavior. Then children were asked about this interaction with the teaching assistant. Again, some of the children were familiar with this assistant, some were not. Yeah, and then so when questioning, a neutral style would be, okay, what else did he do? And then an incriminating style would, if he says, well, we played games, he wasn't supposed to do that. That was bad. What else did he do? The second part of the interview was a series of closed-ended questions, always asked in a non-leading, neutral manner. 1 week after the initial interview, somebody who didn't know which type of interviewing had occurred repeated the interview process. Okay, so there were some spontaneous negative statements about the TA. Most of them were from children who had the incriminating interview. Here are some graphical representations of the outcome of the study. We see that the neutral people evaluated in a neutral way never really had any negative false positive, never said that the person did something that they had never done. But those with cued recall did, whether they were familiar or not with the person. The number of spontaneous negative statements in the second interview were dramatically higher for those who had the incriminating style of interviewing, and much more so for people who did not have familiarity with the TA. And we're just assuming that all the interactions with the TA were positive prior to the experiment. Now, with using the incriminating style, you could get children in the initial interview to say things, a great percentage of things that the child would endorse, of 75 to 95%. You could get them to endorse that, but just extremely lower for people, especially people who were neutral questioning style and familiar with the TA. A great study, a very nicely designed study showing the effect of incriminating styles of interviewing. So this for which child witnesses, you just want to be able to demonstrate that this sort of questioning has not occurred, because if it has, their testimony should be regarded as very highly likely, potentially contaminated. Thank you.